Can you imagine waking up one day and realizing the person you trusted most, your own brother, had been systematically sabotaging your life for years? What if his ultimate move was so twisted, so unbelievably manipulative, it tore your entire family apart, all because he couldn't let go of my toxic ex? People always ask me, what was wrong with him? And honestly, for the longest time, I asked myself the same damn question. There was no clean answer. My brother wasn't overtly cruel. He wasn't the type to yell or throw things, or start shouting matches at the dinner table. No, his cruelty was far more insidious. He just decided somewhere along the line that a girl I dated back in high school was the best thing that ever happened to me, and that me, walking away from her, was some colossal mistake he had not just the right but the responsibility to fix. He was so absolutely convinced of it, so convinced that when I finally ended things with her, he didn't react like a normal person whose relationship wasn't even on the line. He went out, deliberately, and found a way to staple her to our family permanently. And he did it all with this smug grin on his face, like he was doing me some huge favor. I was too blind, too dense to appreciate. It took years. It took a whole damn divorce that wasn't mine. It took a protective order. And it took a chilling note left on my kitchen counter while my wife was pregnant, for me to finally understand. The person I should have been protecting myself from all along wasn't my ex. Not really. It was the brother everyone constantly told me I was so lucky to have. To truly grasp how this could happen, you have to understand my brother's place in our family. Why no one, for so long, even dared to stop him. He was the golden one, the first son, the one who did everything a few years ahead of me, and always seemed to do it perfectly. He was the one my father bragged about at work, the one my mother pointed to when she wanted to make some grand point about ambition, or loyalty, or any other virtue she felt I was perpetually falling short on. His opinion carried immense weight in our house, the kind of quiet, constant power that money holds in the background of every single decision. If my brother approved of something, it was instantly good. If my brother had even a flicker of doubt, everyone paused, held their breath. So, when he decided that a relationship was destiny, it wasn't just one man's casual opinion floating around the dinner table. Oh no, it was a verdict, a pronouncement. And the rest of the family simply arranged themselves around it without even realizing they were doing it. I grew up believing he was on my side, and it took me most of my 20s to finally, painfully understand that being on my side and running my life were two vastly, fundamentally different things. And he had only ever been interested in one of them. To understand how it got this bad, we have to go back to when I was 17. My brother brought her home for the first time. She was his friend. Before she was anything to me. They'd met through some weekend league, and he'd been talking about her for weeks, singing her praises. So funny, he'd say. So sharp, the kind of person you just want around. My brother is 3 years older, and back then, I still thought he had the entire world figured out. So, when he confidently declared that we would be perfect together, it didn't even occur to me to question him. He set it up so subtly, so casually, I didn't even realize I was being manipulated. He invited her to a family barbecue, sat her next to me, and then he spent the entire afternoon steering the conversation, subtly, expertly, until the two of us were the only ones still talking by the time the coals went cold. I remember thinking, wow, she's completely out of my league, and being genuinely surprised she laughed at my dumb jokes. My brother just watched the whole thing from across the yard, that satisfied look on his face, like a man who just closed the biggest deal of his life. In his head, he had made this happen. And nothing that came after ever fully shook that belief loose. For a while it was good, in that intense, dizzying way first relationships are good when you're too young, too naive to really know what you're looking at. She was incredibly charming in front of my family, and they just ate it up. She remembered my mother's birthday before I did. She fixed the wobbling leg on my father's favorite chair without even being asked. She learned my sister's exact coffee order. She had this knack, this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like the temperature had just gone up a few pleasant degrees. And my parents, especially my father, absolutely adored her for it. My father isn't an easy man to win over, not by a long shot, but she won him over in a single summer. After that, he treated her less like his son's girlfriend and more like a personal project he was deeply invested in. He'd tell people, right in front of me, she's the best thing to happen to this family in years, like it was a compliment I should be grateful for. And I was young enough, dumb enough to take it as one. But here's the thing. The thing nobody outside the two of us ever saw, what she was like when the audience went home. In front of my family, she was sunshine and warmth, easygoing. When we were alone, she kept a meticulous running tally of everything I did wrong, and she'd recite it back to me in excruciating detail at the worst possible moments. She'd go through my phone and call it caring. She'd decide she was upset about something, then flat out refuse to tell me what it was, leaving me to twist for hours trying to guess, so that whatever I eventually landed on, I was already apologizing before I even understood the crime. She was sweet, right up until I wanted to spend time with my own friends. And then, suddenly there was a headache, or a sudden blazing fight, or just a long, icy silence that made the thought of going out feel like more trouble than it was worth. Slowly, subtly, without ever truly deciding to, I stopped seeing the people I used to see. I told myself, this is just what a serious relationship is. I was 17. I had nothing to compare it to, except movies, and she was incredibly good at making all the bad parts feel like irrefutable proof of just how much she loved me. There was one night that stands out more than any other, because it was the first time I understood, somewhere deep below the part of my brain that was still making excuses, that something was actually profoundly wrong. A friend I'd known since childhood was having a birthday party. I told her weeks in advance I was going. It mattered to me. I'd only be gone a few hours. The day of the party, she called me, crying, sobbing about a fight we had never even had, describing things I had supposedly said that I had zero memory of uttering. By the time she was done, I was so utterly turned around, so mentally exhausted, that I was apologizing for words that had never even left my mouth. I stayed home. I missed the birthday. And the strangest part, once I'd canceled, once I'd chosen her over my friend, she got better instantly. Warm, affectionate, grateful. Like the entire storm had only ever been about getting me to make that one specific choice. I told myself she was just having a hard day. The truth, which took me years to name, was that she had learned exactly how much weather she needed to generate to keep me where she wanted me, and she generated it meticulously on schedule. My family never saw a single minute of that, because in front of them she was pure sunshine, and the only witness to the rest of it was a teenage boy who kept stupidly deciding he was the problem. By the time I was 19, most of the friendships I'd walked into that relationship with had quietly, heartbreakingly ended. Not with any dramatic fight, just a slow, painful erosion of showing up. Because showing up had a cost, and that cost was always, always paid at home. My brother, meanwhile, only ever saw the sunshine version, and he built his entire unwavering certainty about her on top of it. He'd tell me how lucky I was to have found someone so devoted, someone who wanted to spend every minute with me, and he meant it as genuine praise. He didn't know that the devotion he so admired was actually a leash. He never once asked why I stopped coming around to things, or why the friends he used to see me with had simply vanished. He just watched the polished surface she showed the family and decided with utter conviction that it was the whole ocean. We dated for almost 3 years, and in that time she became so deeply woven into my family's fabric that leaving her started to feel structurally impossible, like trying to remove one load-bearing wall of a house without the entire roof collapsing. My brother treated her very presence as irrefutable evidence that his judgment was flawless. My father treated her like his own daughter. My mother liked her too, though looking back, I think my mother saw little more than she ever let on. My sister, the one who eventually became the only person in my family I could truly trust, was quieter about it. But even she got swept up in how smoothly everything seemed to be going, and the whole time, the person driving the enthusiasm harder than anyone else was my brother. He wasn't just happy for me, he was invested, in a way that felt completely out of proportion. Like my relationship was some stock he bought early and needed to constantly talk up, just to make sure its value never, ever dropped. The proposal, that's where the cracks I had been desperately ignoring finally split all the way open. It was at my own graduation party, of all places. I'd just finished my program, and my parents threw a small gathering in the backyard, the same yard where my brother had introduced us 3 years earlier. I thought for once the night was about me. Instead, halfway through, she stood up, tapped a glass, and started talking about how we'd grown up together, how she couldn't imagine a future that wasn't the two of us. My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my knees. I looked around, and it hit me. The whole thing was staged. There was a photographer I didn't recognize crouched near the fence. My father was already tearing up, and my brother? He was standing right behind her holding the little velvet box, clearly having helped plan every single second of it. He was beaming at me, like he was handing me the keys to my entire life. She got down on one knee, right there, in front of my family and the people I had just graduated with. A loud buzzing filled my ears, making it impossible to hear the actual words. Then everyone was looking at me, waiting, because of course they were. It was my turn to play the part they had written for me. I said no. I didn't say it dramatically. I didn't stand up and make some grand speech. I just sat there for a second, completely frozen, and then, quietly, I said that I loved her. But I wasn't ready for this. Not like this. Not at 20 years old with a stranger documenting the whole thing. The yard went silent, that heavy, choking kind of silence where even the sound of someone setting down a cup feels like an insult. Her face, it did something I will never forget. A complete collapse behind the eyes, while her mouth kept trying desperately to hold a smile. My father made a sound like I had physically struck him. My mother went completely still. My sister looked at me with something that might have been the first flicker of understanding anyone in my family had ever shown. And my brother? He looked more than anyone. Betrayed, not sad, not concerned for me. Betrayed, as if I had reached into the middle of his masterpiece and simply ripped it in half, right in front of witnesses. What came after that night wasn't a conversation. It was a campaign. My father pulled me aside the next day and asked me with exactly that tone, "What's your problem?" As if my refusal itself was a symptom of some defect they needed to diagnose. My mother tried the softer route, telling me how many people never find someone so devoted, how lucky I was, how sure was I, really, that I wanted to throw that away. My sister stayed out of it, which at the time felt like an abandonment, but later I understood was the only sane response available to her. And my brother, he wouldn't let it go. Not for a single day. He called me ungrateful. He reminded me more than once that he was the one who had brought her into my life, as if that gave him some permanent stake in whether I stayed. He said I was going to regret this, that I was too young to understand what I was giving up. That some people wait their whole lives for what I was walking away from. He kept saying we were perfect together, like he had access to some deeper truth I was simply too foolish to see. At one point, he actually suggested I just accept the proposal and have a very long engagement, as if promising to marry someone eventually was a reasonable compromise for not wanting to marry them at all. We limped along for a few more months, because breaking up cleanly felt harder than just letting it rot, but that proposal sat between us like a third, ever-present person at every single table. She watched me constantly for any sign I was pulling away, and every time I wanted a night with the friends I was slowly, cautiously trying to reclaim, it turned into an interrogation. Eventually, I was the one who said out loud what we both already knew. That it was over, that we wanted different things, that I just couldn't keep shrinking myself to fit inside the version of me she needed me to be. She cried. My father cried when he heard, and my brother reacted like I had died. He mourned that relationship harder than either of us did, which, looking back, should have told me everything. But at the time, I was just so overwhelmingly relieved to be out that I didn't stop to ask why my brother was grieving a woman who had never even been his. I thought that was the end of it. For about a month it was. Then my mother mentioned, in that careful voice she uses when she's bracing for a reaction, that my brother had been spending a lot of time with my ex's younger sister. I actually laughed, because I thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. Out of everyone in the entire world, out of every possible person my brother could have chosen, he had gone and started dating the sister of the woman I had just spent 3 grueling years extracting myself from. He framed it as the most natural thing in the world. He said they had always gotten along at family events, that they had real chemistry, that it was nobody's business but theirs. And technically, he was right. It was his business who he dated, but there's a crucial difference between what a person is technically allowed to do and what a person does knowing exactly what it will cost you. And my brother? My brother lived in that difference like it was a house he had meticulously built on purpose. Because here's what dating her sister actually accomplished, and I believe, with every fiber of my being, he knew it precisely. It meant my ex was now permanently attached to our family. It meant that no matter how completely I ended things, she would be at every holiday, every birthday, every wedding and funeral for the rest of our lives, because she was my brother's girlfriend's sister, and you simply do not exclude family. He had found the one move that made my breakup irrelevant. He had effectively put her back in the absolute center of my life and made it so that objecting to it made me the difficult one. What made it almost impressive in a horrifying way was the timing. He didn't start dating her sister in the raw weeks right after the breakup, when it would have looked exactly like what it was, a calculated retaliatory strike. No, he waited. He let a respectable amount of time pass, long enough that when it finally happened, everyone could pretend it was organic. Just two people who had known each other for years finally noticing each other. He's patient like that. He has always understood that if you want to get away with something truly audacious, you do it slowly enough that no single step looks like a conscious decision. By the time I understood what he had built, it was already load-bearing. It was already a permanent fixture. My father was thrilled, because it meant the woman he adored was staying. My mother had reservations, but she kept them mostly to herself, and I was left holding an objection that had no clean, acceptable way to be voiced. Because the only honest version of it was, please do not marry into my ex's family, specifically so that my ex has to be at my funeral one day. And there is simply no way to say that sentence out loud without sounding completely insane, even when it is completely true. I want to be fair, because I've gone over this 1,000 times, looking for the version where I was the unreasonable one. Maybe my brother told himself a kinder story. Maybe in his head he genuinely had fallen for her sister, and the convenient bonus of keeping my ex around was just that, a bonus he didn't have to feel bad about. I have tried truly to believe that, but then I remember the way he seated us together, the stories he told around the fire, the whispers about her still loving me, the small waiting smile at the rehearsal dinner, and the version where it was all an accident just falls apart. You don't accidentally arrange a decade of a person's life around a relationship they ended. That takes intention, sustained, relentless intention over years. And my brother, he had it in abundance. At first, I tried to be an adult about it. I told myself that grown people date grown people, that I didn't own my ex or her family, that I was the one who had ended the relationship, so I had no right to police who circled back into her orbit. I gave that little speech to myself so many times it stopped meaning anything, because the reality on the ground had absolutely nothing to do with fairness. Within a couple of months, my ex was showing up to family dinners again, invited by my brother, warmly welcomed by my father, and I was the one expected to swallow my discomfort, to choke down my feelings, so the room could remain pleasant. My brother would seat her near me. He would bring up old memories in front of everyone. Remember that trip we took? The inside jokes? Narrating my own past back to me in front of my whole family, while she sat there glowing, and I sat there feeling like a museum exhibit. At one point, he actually said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some couples are just meant to find their way back to each other," and he looked right at me when he said it. I got up and walked down to the water in the dark and just stood there for a long time. When I came back, he asked, with what sounded like genuine hurt in his voice, "Why do you always have to make everything so difficult?" That was his special talent. He could spend an entire weekend engineering my utter discomfort, and then look genuinely wounded that I was uncomfortable. And somehow, I was the one who always ended up apologizing for the mood. Those weekends, those dinners, those holidays, they stacked up over the years into a kind of slow-motion siege. There was never one big dramatic event I could point to and say, "Look, this is unacceptable." It was 1,000 small arrangements, each one individually deniable, each one leaving me feeling a little more cornered. And my brother, he conducted all of it with the patience of a man who had decided he had the rest of his life to simply wait me out. When I tried to describe it to anyone outside the family, it sounded like nothing. My brother invited my ex to things. So what? But living inside it, it was like being slowly walled into a room, one brick at a time, by someone who smiled at you through the shrinking gap and told you, with utter sincerity, it was for your own good. Around that time, I decided I needed distance. Distance that had absolutely nothing to do with any of them. I've been treading water at a local job, feeling utterly stagnant. So I applied for a program in another state, a year-long placement in my field that I had told no one I was even considering. Nobody in my family pushed me toward it. Nobody helped with the application. When I got in, it was the first thing in my adult life that was entirely mine, untouched by their opinions. and I packed a bag and left with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. That's where I met the woman who would become my wife. She was there on the same placement, escaping her own complicated family. We ended up next to each other at a painfully boring orientation, trading quiet, conspiratorial jokes about the slideshow. It was easy. So easy. In a way that almost scared me, precisely because nothing about it felt like a performance. There was no audience, no brother subtly steering the conversation, no parents deciding in advance that we were destiny, just two people who genuinely liked each other and got to find that out at their own pace. We spent the year getting gloriously lost in a city neither of us knew, talking about everything. And for the first time, I truly understood that a relationship wasn't supposed to feel like a hostage negotiation. There was a small moment that year that I didn't fully appreciate until much later. A few months in, an old friend from home passed through the city on a trip. I mentioned to my girlfriend that I wanted to spend the evening catching up with him, and I braced myself, purely out of habit. Some part of me still expected the headache to magically materialize, a fight to appear out of nowhere, some sudden, unavoidable reason for the plan to become impossible. Instead, she just said, "That sounds nice. Say hello for me. Have a good time." That was it. No test, no storm, no tally kept for later. I remember sitting on the bus, on the way to meet my friend, feeling something close to vertigo, because I had spent my entire early adulthood being trained to expect a punishment that simply never came. It sounds absurd to describe being treated normally as a revelation, but that's exactly what it was, and it told me more about what I had survived than any argument ever could. I had gotten so used to a leash that a person handing me an ordinary evening felt like a gift I didn't even know how to hold. We talked about the hard things too, not just the easy ones. I told her about my family, about the proposal at my graduation, about the brother who just couldn't let go. And she listened, without trying to fix it, or minimize it, or tell me I was being dramatic. She just believed me. That was the whole thing. She believed me the first time, without a campaign, without stacks of evidence, without me having to perform my pain until it was legible to her. I had spent so many years in rooms where my own memory was treated as a negotiating position. That being simply believed felt almost unbearable. At first, I kept waiting for the catch. There was no catch. There was just a person who took me at my word. And slowly, gently, I started to take myself at my word too. Which, as it turned out, was the most dangerous thing that could have happened to my family, though none of us knew it yet. When the placement ended, we did the long distance thing, rather than pretend geography could undo what we had built. It wasn't glamorous. It was late night calls when one of us was half asleep. It was meticulously saving for plane tickets. It was memorizing time zones. But it was mine, and the best part? My family had no claim on it. My parents knew she existed, but they hadn't been in the room when it started. And my brother? He couldn't hijack the story because he hadn't written a single line of it. That alone made it feel protected, in a way nothing else in my life had ever been. After about a year of that, she found work near me, and I was genuinely thrilled at the beautifully boring idea of building an ordinary life with someone. When she moved and finally met my family properly, my mother liked her right away, in that cautious way parents like someone when they can tell their kid is serious. My sister took to her immediately. The two of them became incredibly close. But my father? He was cold from the first handshake. He called her my little study abroad phase right to my face, and my brother, predictably, had opinions. He'd say things like, "We'll see where that goes," in that fake neutral tone that is anything but neutral. And whenever her name came up, he'd find a way to mention my ex in the very next breath, as if the two of them were still, somehow, a live comparison. When my wife and I got engaged a year later, my brother smiled for the pictures. And then he pulled me aside that same night to ask, with what I think he believed was genuine concern, whether I was sure I wasn't just rebounding, whether I had really processed my first relationship, whether I might be settling because I was afraid to admit the real one had gotten away. I stared at him like he was speaking another language. My ex had been out of my life, as anything more than an unwanted family fixture, for years by then. But in my brother's head, she was still my baseline, the standard every woman after her would be measured against. And he was not going to let a little thing like my actual happiness get in the way of a story he had already decided was true. My father echoed it in his own way, telling me there was no rush to plan a wedding, that I should take my time and be sure. and the sureness he wanted me to arrive at was painfully obvious to everyone in the room. There was a dinner right after the engagement that made the whole thing agonizingly clear. My wife, my fiancée then, had cooked for my parents. Wanting to do it right, wanting them to like her, she had gone to real trouble. My father spent the entire meal comparing her, out loud, to my ex. Not cruelly on the surface. He'd say things like, "This is good, though so and so used to make it a certain way." Or he'd mention some trip my ex had once planned, some gift she had once given, some clever thing she had once said, threading her through the whole evening like a ghost he was determined to keep at the table. My fiancée handled it with more grace than I could have ever mustered. She smiled, asked questions, refilled his glass, but on the drive home she was quiet for a long, heavy time. And then she asked me very gently whether my father actually wanted me to be happy, or whether he just wanted me to be with a specific person, because from where she was sitting, those were starting to look like two very different things. I didn't have an answer for her, because I was only just beginning to understand that they had never been the same thing to him at all. My family had fallen in love with a version of my life that was convenient for their own fantasies, and they had decided to keep punishing me, quietly and endlessly, for refusing to act it out. The wedding that finally forced everything into the open wasn't even mine. It was my brother's. He was marrying my ex's sister, which meant in the sick, twisted geometry he had constructed that my ex was now formally becoming family. And there was going to be an entire ceremony to celebrate the arrangement. He asked me to be a groomsman, and I said yes, because saying no felt like detonating something I wasn't ready to detonate.